which is course 2. I've also participated in the training of course 3, course 4, as course 5. Most recently, I was heading the capacity development division of the EFCC Academy, where I was in charge with development of curriculum for the betterment of our officers. Mr. President, distinguished senators, I wish to state here that in all my career at the EFCC, the provisions of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the extant laws of this country, rules and regulations within the EFCC have always and will always guide my actions if confirmed by this hallowed chamber as the next executive chairman of the EFCC. I'm not unmindful of the enormous responsibility before me and my colleagues, but I believe we are up to the task. And I also believe that we will not fix the blame of the past. We will accept our own responsibility for the future. The fear of God, national interest, patriotism in us, and the fact that we are young men, the future of this country is with us, are the driving force that will ensure that come what may, at the end of my tenure, I will leave the EFCC a better place. Mr. President, distinguished senators, permit me to state here also that the EFCC is apparently the only cosmopolitan agency in Nigeria looking at the composition of the board of the EFCC. You have representation from the Ministry of Finance, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Ministry of Justice. You have Comptroller General of Customs, you have Comptroller General of Immigration, you have Comptroller General of Prisons, CBN Governor, Director General of the DSS, Director General of NIA, among others, which makes it very easy for me, if confirmed by this hallowed chamber, to be able to relate with other security agencies in this country for the purpose of achieving the mandate of this government of ridding this country of all forms of corruption as well as economic and financial crimes. And to our strategic partners around the world, particularly in the United States of America, United Kingdom, South Africa, etc., I intend to work with them closely, sharing information and intelligence in order to attain our mutual objectives as well as our independent objectives as well. But paramount of which is close to my heart is the fact that we need to repatriate all our stolen assets for the benefit and the betterment of all Nigerians here at home. Mr. President, distinguished senators, I'm not unaware of the fact that my nomination has caused a lot of hope for the teeming and millions of youth around the country and the world at large. I want to state here, Mr. President, distinguished senators, that I'm going to give them a very good representation in the governance of this country, so that at the end of the day, more youth will be given huge responsibilities in this country. Let me conclude, Mr. President, distinguished senators, by stating that it is a dream of every patriotic Nigerian to see Nigeria growing to a greater height. And I hope and pray, Mr. President, distinguished senators, that if confirmed, I will live to that task to contribute my quota in seeing that this country is taken to a greater height. There is no better way to end my modest address, which I'm humbled to address this distinguished gathering, than to pledge to Nigeria, my country, to be faithful, loyal, and honest, to serve Nigeria with all my strength, to defend her unity, and uphold our honor and glory, so help me God. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, distinguished senators, for inviting me to this hallowed chamber. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Leader of the Senate. Oh, sorry. Leader, DSP first. Leader, DSP first. DSP. Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Ovie Omo Agege Delta Central. Ovie Omo Agege. Thank you. Thank you, leader. Yes. Chief Whip, DSP can speak for as long as he wishes because he's the DSP. But any other person, 2 minutes. DSP. Thank you, Mr. President. Ovie Omo Agege, Delta Central Senatorial District. Mr. President, I am so impressed and I'm in awe in this very awesome presentation by Mr. Bauer, the chairman of EFCC to be. Mr. President, ordinarily, there would have been no need to ask this young man any question. Mr. President, I've been here, this will be my 6th year in the Senate, and I've seen so many nominees come before us. Mr. President, I have not seen any as eloquent in his presentation. Ordinarily, I would have said, take a bow and go. But Mr. President, clearly he's a very, very brilliant young man. Within a couple of minutes, he's been able to showcase himself. I will plead with my colleagues who share in my belief that ordinarily should take a bow and go. But I think they should be given a chance, Mr. President, for him to further showcase himself. He is a good product. That is why I like to begin, Mr. President, by thanking Mr. President and Commander-in-Chief President Muhammadu Buhari for this nomination. This nomination is unique and it's an aspirational nomination. It's a nomination that has generated hope for millions of our youth in this country. Mr. President, not too long ago, we all recall the incident, what transpired at the Lekki toll gate. Clearly, the youth at that toll gate needed an opportunity to express themselves. Mr. President, with this nomination, the youths of this country can now sit in offices and make those very crucial and fundamental decisions on how Nigeria should be governed. And there cannot be a better platform than the office of the chairman of EFCC. So I want to thank Mr. President for finding this young man worthy. In fact, going through his CV, Mr. President, I was impressed. But in hearing him speak to that CV, Mr. President, so I thank President Muhammadu Buhari for this nomination. For that reason, and for the second reason, Mr. President, this is the first time we are sticking within the local EFCC environment to pick one of their own, one of their pioneer cadets to govern this institution. And it's a great thing. That was always the intendment behind the establishment of that EFCC Act. That yes, at the commencement, there will be borrowings from other security agencies until such time that we're able to groom people who will take over. President Muhammadu Buhari has determined, and we all agree with him, that this is the time and this is the young man. We are very proud of you.
Thank you very much.
The members of the House of Reps who are here, they have every reason to be also proud of your achievements. So too is the Speaker and the members of the Kebbi State House of Assembly who are also here, and members of his family. You have every reason to be proud of this young man, just the way we are. I will support this nomination. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Well, thank you very much. Before I call the leader, let me make a point here. Distinguished colleagues, the Deputy Senate President in his presentation or remarks said, ordinarily he would say, take a bow. Please, I want us to allow this young man to address Nigerians and even the international community. So let's at least exhaust some of these issues that Nigerians want to hear, because we are not the only one. And therefore, this take a bow for now should bow. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I think the Deputy Senate President has spoken my mind, and I don't want to repeat what he has already said. For me, all I will say at this point to my own distinguished colleagues is to beat my chest and say that this is what we from Kebbi State can produce. And that once we get the chance, we will be able to bring the best into the table for Nigerians to appreciate, so that our contributions to the development of this country will be well appreciated. But having said that, Mr. President, it is important, like you said, for us to ask certain questions, if for nothing, but only to draw the attention of the young man to the pitfalls that we have experienced over the years in this institution. I was a director and special assistant to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Ekaite, on the bill establishing the EFCC was brought. And we noticed part of the bill, the reason why certain issues came to be as they were. I'm happy that this is the first time those who were recruited in 2003 have now come of age, and we are returning the EFCC back to its base. Now, the experiences of the past are a lot that all of us have to learn from. None of the chairmen of the EFCC, from New Ribadu down to Magu, successfully concluded their tenure without controversy. Now, for you as a young man, I want to challenge you and ask you, how are you going to set up your operations as chairman of EFCC, knowing where you are, knowing the colleagues with whom you have started, and knowing those who are senior to you, but who maybe belong to another institution, who are now there? How are you going to work and set up the institution so that it works for Nigeria and that the controversies of the past are not repeated? Thank you very much.
That is the leader's privilege. Minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very distinguished colleagues. Mr. Chairman, I can see through the wisdom of this nomination that in the Field Assembly, those of us who were part of the signatories to this act that established the EFCC can see that for the very first time, Nigerians appear to be celebrating this nomination, particularly across the youth. Mr. Nominee, I want to ask a question that is fairly related to what the Senate leader said. Against the backdrop of innuendos, maybe from hunters becoming the hunted, especially those working under you, how will you, or how do you intend to reposition this commission so as to create confidence in the minds of Nigeria, given the ovation that followed your nomination? That's my question.
Thank you, Minority Leader. Senator Mohammed Adamalero.
Sorry about the mix-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues. Delegation from Kebbi State that came to witness the screening and confirmation of Abdul Rashid Bawa as chairman of the FCC. Mr. Chairman, let me start by saying that Abdul Rashid Bawa is from my constituency. And we live very close to each other. I know him to be very thorough, meticulous, and very diligent in the performance of his duty. I agree with you that we should allow the senators to ask as many questions as possible, because we really have a very good product, a product that we can sell anywhere. And Nigerians will be very happy, will be very delighted to hear from him how he intends to restructure the EFCC so that it can perform optimally. Mr. President, since we are limited to only one question, the only question I will ask is that there is allegation in the press, and particularly in the social media, that the seized and forfeited assets at Port Harcourt were not properly disposed of. And I want your response on this so that the Senate, Nigerians, and indeed the international community will know truly what happened. Mr. President, as I said earlier, we have a good product. We want him to tell Nigerians how he intends to restructure the EFCC, and we really want him to answer as many questions as possible. We don't want that situation where we will tell the nominee, take a ball and go. No. This one is a nomination like no other. So he is competent. He is the right person for this job. And perhaps being a pioneer staff of EFCC, he will do a lot for this country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Abulai Nalla, you want to speak? All right.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, permit me to quote Sultan Bello in his book, Al-Ghaid, specifically page 59. And I quote, "The most abhorred and remote from God is a tyrannical ruler. Whosoever commits oppression is caused by Allah, and giving authority to those unfit for it is oppression," unquote. My colleagues, we've been in this chamber some of you in the last 5 years, some of you in the last 1.5 years as senators of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We have had the privilege of seeing nominees present themselves here for the office for which they were being nominated. I can stand here and proudly say that Abdul-Rashid Bawa has clearly demonstrated that he has the capacity and the knowledge to run the office of the Economic and Financial Crime Commission as chairman. What that means is that the nomination by Mr. President has clearly passed the test that Sultan Bello referred to in his book, Al-Guide. I know him very well, and I'm not surprised. Whoever knows his father knows that Abdul Rashid is not even half of what his father has done to us in KB and done to this country. And I know the moral standing from which he is coming. And I know that he will perfectly situate himself to understand the building of the reputation that his family has built and to insulate himself from use and misuse by political people. I therefore call on my colleagues to approve his nomination, and in addition to his pledge that he will prove to Nigerians that youth can do it, so that you give him opportunity for Mr. President to look for more competent people to appoint for the purpose of running affairs of this country. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Nominee, you can respond, please. Then I will take the next set of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished senators, for the honor once again. The Senate leader and the minority leader asked two different questions, but both towards gearing repositioning of the EFCC. Before thinking of repositioning of any institution, we need to remind ourselves what that institution stands for. And there is no better way to talk about the EFCC than the Establishment Act itself. Mr. President, distinguished senators, the EFCC is backed by a law passed by this hallowed chamber or this National Assembly, and Section 7 and of course Section 6 of the EFCC Establishment Act clearly define the functions of the EFCC, as well as special powers and the laws that the EFCC is empowered to enforce. The provision of the Act itself, which is the Establishment Act 2004, the provisions of the Money Laundering Prohibition Act, the provisions of Advance Fee Fraud and Other Related Offences Act, the provisions of Failed Bank Recovery of Debt Act, the provisions of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act, Miscellaneous Offences Act, as well as sections of the Penal Code and Criminal Code that relate to economic and financial crimes. However, in 2015, this National Assembly passed the Cybercrime Act, which EFCC is among the institutions that is empowered to enforce. The Federal Revenue Act 2007 also came on board, in which we are also empowered to enforce certain provisions. Distinguished senators, that is the law or the act that the EFCC empowered to enforce. And throughout our history, the Commission have tried its modest best to see to it that those provisions of the law are being upheld. But of course, along the line, like any other institution or organization, there are pitfalls because we are not perfect, we are not human beings. What I will do to reposition the EFCC, or what I envisage the EFCC to do, is to ensure that we work on our own standard operational procedure to improve on the standard operational procedures, so much so that all that is expected of us is being written down somewhere in a document to try as much as possible to curtail the usage of discretion from the office of the executive chairman down to the ordinary investigator in the EFCC. We are looking forward to an EFCC whereby I, as executive chairman, if I give an instruction to a junior officer, he will look at my face and say, "Sir, I've understood your instruction, but I will not be able to do it because of so section of the rules and regulations governing the EFCC." We hope that if confirmed by this Senate, we are going to be more transparent, we are going to be more accountable. We have, of course, the lingering problem or issues bordering on management of assets, etc., etc. We hope, if given the opportunity, my colleagues and I will embark on the digitalization of the processes in the EFCC. In essence, what I'm saying is that we are going to embrace technology to enable us keep our records properly so that as at when due, if Nigerians are asking questions, it's just a matter of pressing a button. The single senators, I also want to emphasize here regarding the issue of repositioning. I've talked about processes and procedures and the law, but the backbone of every organization is in its human resource. I hope and pray that we will still come back to this chamber, of course, for proper appropriation, etc., to enable us build the capacity of our staff at the EFCC to meet up with the current challenges of new typologies of crime, as well as trends in money laundering, etc., etc., so that at the end of the day, our vision of getting this country rid of economic and financial crimes is actualized. EFCC, as of today, we have, of course, an academy. We need to work on it. We need to reorganize it so that it meets up with the challenge of the current world. I have talked about the issue of synergy between the EFCC and sister security and law enforcement agencies in the country, as well as the work I envisage to do together with our own foreign strategic partners. We are going to work on that. We are going to strengthen it. EFCC is not a lone ranger. We are going to reach out. The job of fighting economic and financial crimes is for everybody to be on board. And we will ensure that because we don't have monopoly of knowledge, everybody is on board to ensure that at least we rid this country of economic and financial crimes. Going forward, and in relation to this, Mr. President, the single senator, the EFCC under my watch, and if confirmed by this hallowed chamber, will work on proactive approach rather than reactive approach in the process of good governance in this country, rather than fighting wars on corruption. We understood at the Commission that there is difference between fighting corrupt people and fighting corruption. Fighting corruption is about good governance. It's about working on these institutions of government to tell them, areas where they need to work to avoid leakages, etc., etc. We're going to work on that, and hopefully the EFCC is going to be a better place in that regard. The single senator, Muhammad Adamu Aleru, from my constituency, thank you very much, sir, for kind words, asks about the issue of sales of trucks in Port Harcourt. Thank you very much, the single senator, for asking that question. Anybody that is familiar with the processes and workings of the EFCC knows that even the executive chairman of the EFCC doesn't have the powers to dispose a single asset. That responsibility lies with the office of the Secretary of the Commission. I'm saying this, I'm starting from that end to confirm to Nigerians and indeed this chamber that I, as zonal head of the EFCC, never for once sold a single asset in Port Harcourt. I never did. The then secretary of the commission, together with 3 directors and other staff from the headquarters, flew into Port Harcourt and disposed of the trucks and other assets in them that were forfeited to the federal government of Nigeria, sequel to our own singular effort as part of the reformation that I brought to the Port Harcourt Zonal Office. Let me put it on record, Mr. President, distinguished senators, that when I took over the Port Harcourt Zonal Office in January 2019, the year before, the Zonal Office recorded only 33 convictions. But because of the way we transformed the Zonal Office, we recorded an unprecedented 216 convictions within a year. 216 convictions. We never sold anything in Port Harcourt Zonal Office. It was the head office that did everything. We don't know how the payments were made. We don't know who buy. We don't know who lost out in the auction, etc., etc. That is for the record. And besides, the single senators, assuming we even did that, the EFCC could have been the first to punish me. They could have investigated me. They could have even prosecuted me. But the then director of operations, who was our director of operations, who happens to be the acting chairman of the commission as at now, was the one that even posted me to Lagos to head. Assuming I have something or skeletal or something bad that I did, he couldn't have been thinking of giving me higher responsibility to manage the biggest operational base in the EFCC. Thank you very much, distinguished senators.
Thank you. Mr. Nominee, you too, it's looking like we have to restrict you to your responses.
Yes.
To within some, because there will be a lot of questions.
Thank you very much.
So the next set will be Senator Ekwaramadu, Senator Gabriel Suswam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleagues. I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to offer an advice to the nominee. First, let me say that the nominee is highly qualified, is also competent, and is very professional. But that is as an investigator. You know what a man can do when you give him power or money. You're not going to be chairman, and indeed an executive chairman of EFCC. Mr. Nominee, where I come from, the tortoise is reputed to be a very wise animal. So towards the end of the life of the tortoise called 3 of his children, and then put a particular question to them. So the first one, he asked, how many times will something happen to you and you learn? So the first said 3 times. After the first, second, and third one, he will learn from his mistakes. So he asked the second one how many times. The second one replied that after 2 times, he will learn from his mistakes. Then he asked the last one. Last one paused and said, I will not allow anything to happen to me. I will learn from the mistake of others. You're not going to be the first chairman of EFCC. You know the circumstances others came. You know how they managed their affairs. You know how they ended. You know that they came out of the EFCC and became like ordinary citizens. And of course, you know that at the end of their life, they'll meet their creator to account for their actions. So I'm going to advise you to rather learn from those mistakes, those ones made, because ultimately, your tenure will end. And then you'll be like any of us. And you also meet your creator at the end of your stay here. So I'd like to advise you, because you've been there, to check those mistakes they made in both the operations, their human relations, the way they did their job, how they answered, how they responded to people, and of course, tell how they carry their responsibilities and be able to learn from those mistakes. So on this note, I want to wish you good luck.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Dr. Gabriel Suswam, Benin Northeast. Abdurrashid Bawa,
Yes.
I've looked at your CV, I've listened to you. From your CV and articulation, you are eminently qualified for the position for which you are nominated for. I'm also happy that in your presentation, you make reference copiously to the extant laws that set EFCC up and others. And so I assume that you are very conversant with the provisions of the EFCC Act. My question is on Section 2(1)(a) sub 2 of the EFCC Act, which stipulate for qualification outside of academic qualification. Abdulaziz, within the context and the definition of that section, are you qualified to be appointed as EFCC chairman? Mr. President, it's a straightforward question.
Thank you. Senator Omako.
Thank you, Mr. President, and my dear colleagues. While I subscribe to all the good things that were said about the nominee and his family background, which I know very well because they worked in the former Sokoto before it was created, but I can say much more about what the nominee is really, what his background should be. The nominee, questions were asked which were a little bit general. Let me ask a very small question as to part of the general question that was asked as to your effort to reposition the FCC when eventually confirmed and took over. In doing so, do you intend to return all the police officers there, or do you want to retain them in service? Thank you.
Senator Alem.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I'm Mohamed Ali Ndume, representing Borno South. Congratulations, Abdul Rashid, for your nomination. But you know the task before you. It's a big one. First of all, I will assume, and I think you know what UWO means, unexplained wealth order.
Yes.
And you know what Unexplained Wealth Act is. And you know, as an international investigator, especially as it relates to money laundering, asking you to be the executive chairman of EFCC in Nigeria and to succeed without the unexplained wealth order is like asking you to do the impossible. Are you going to push for the Unexplained Wealth Act and order that is very basic and necessary in fighting money laundering and financial crimes? In answering my question, you may wish to highlight on what that term means. As it is, Nigeria is one of the only countries around, that has not invoked the Unexplained Wealth Act or order. And without that, the fight against financial crime, money laundering will just be a scratch on the surface.
Thank you very much.
Senator Michael Opemi Bamidele.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm Michael Okoyemi Bamidele. I represent the Central Senatorial District. Mr. Nominee, I just want to join the rest of my colleagues in identifying with the fact that, per adventure, this Senate confirms your appointment. This would have raised a lot of hope with respect to the expectations of Nigerians from not just you, but the youth population. And as one of parliamentarians who also can safely describe themselves as products of the struggle of Nigerian youth, I want to say that I'll be one of the people who have such expectation. And you made one point here which actually struck me. You drew a line of demarcation between fighting corruption and fighting corrupt people. For me, that's very profound, that's very fundamental, and it speaks to the whole essence of our anti-graft crusade. In other words, it is my own expectation, it is my expectation that under your leadership, the EFCC, while trying to catch up with corrupt people, will do everything possible to ensure that as an institution, it continues to emphasize on the need for government to address those fundamentals that will continue to enhance corruption. And finally, how, as the chairman, would you ensure that it is not just, the Yahoo boys who are prosecuted? How will you ensure that convictions are also secured?
Well, this is where we'll round off today's live broadcast of Senate plenary. Well, at the moment, the Senate is screening the nominee for appointment as chairman